of archival documents from the Pacific War, especially surrounding Okinawa, which is where I grew up on a military base, a US military base. I ended up there because after my mom and dad divorced, my mom got a job as a teacher for the Department of Defense schools overseas. And it was great for her being a single mom with a 10-year-old because it meant kind of automatic community. We got a house on base, everything was in place. You know, we just showed up and there it was. It was like a new life. And it was just like a kind of reproduction of suburbia, basically, on an island in this East China Sea. And as I was growing up there, I didn't think about, and I don't think anybody else really around me was thinking about what it meant that we were there, feeling safe, having a regular American high school experience, enclosed by a barbed wire fence, which also enclosed fighter jets and nuclear bombs, which supposedly weren't there, but it's since revealed. I mean, everybody knew they were there. They were there the whole time. So I, you know, as I got older, I started to think about how that was possible. And really who was paying for my sense of security there and in what currency. And so this book came out of that thinking. So each of the poems looks like, you know, more or less like normal poems in the book, but they all also have a QR code. And so if you follow the QR code, it takes you to a website where there are interactive versions of the poems. And those are the original archival documents photoshopped so that and coded so that if you scroll up and down with your mouse on a laptop or computer, or if you use your finger back and forth on your iPhone or tablet, you can make the text disappear and appear again. So it's really important to me to have that sort of tactile involvement of a reader in that part. So for me, this is really, I mean, the book is just half of it. You know, it's really kind of a, that's more of a digital project for me. So I'm going to share in the chat links to all three poems that I'm going to read tonight, this afternoon for you, most of you all. So I've just shared that. That first one, I'll follow this link and share my screen so you can see what this looks like. This poem is called Security. And if I follow it, let me get back to Zoom and screen share. I have to find it. Sorry, give me a moment. Okay, so do you see security in Northeast Asia? Yeah, okay, great. So this poem is called Security. And you can see if you scroll down on the side without putting your mouse over, it's a poem in 4 sections. This is the first section, and you can just see like the first lines of the poem, which I'll read in just a moment. If you scroll over, you'll see as you scroll down, you can see actually this is a document. It's called Security in Northeast Asia from Okinawa to the DMZ. And it was a hearing in April of 1996 in the House of Representatives of the US Congress. So this hearing happened during President Bill Clinton's diplomatic visit to Korea and Japan. And it was about 7 months after the biggest anti-US base protests in a generation had been set off on Okinawa and elsewhere by the abduction and rape of a 12-year-old Okinawan girl by 3 American servicemen. So the people talking, they're all men. The men talking in the security hearing kind of, they allude to that event and the protests afterwards. They say like these events, you know, but they never actually mention what was happening or why this conversation is taking place the way it is right now in the subcommittee hearing. So my hope for the actual poem, I'm going to stop sharing and come back to you. My hope for this poem and for the book as a whole, and I guess for poetry more generally, really, is to give a more human account of the long aftermath of war. I mean, this was 50 years, 1996, 50 years after the war ended. I mean, it's still happening now, right? The stuff is still happening in Okinawa and other places now. So the poem is in 4 sections and is basically from the first person point of view of a civilian kind of learning to live with war, learning how war necessitates certain changes. So it's Security. This is the first of 4 sections. It's pretty short. 1. I believe I hear the heels of a man at attention. He approaches, grows larger as a man of force. His shoulder growing into a point, the arm into a flag. Can you hear my cat? Yeah, okay, sorry, she's at the door. She wants dinner. It's too bad, it's gonna have to wait. Number 2, section 2. I must mention that I speak as an individual observer out on a walk down the block, toward the cold spring or stable, more or less the world. If I am to marry my cold hands to the nation, I should be sure that our map is real, that the character of men can be sized up from my window. Uh, 3. It looks different from this side of the table. I see dead men, the consistency of wax, enduring the cold at the end of the cold, and I think I understand power. A smolder blows into a fire, an armed neighbor intuits the form of a head, a hat, a ship in the fog. And let me say that I am become a hand in a cooperative glove. I incline toward accord. If I see which way the wind is blowing, I will stop and turn. 4. And after, I will be the reminder of the war, the ships under the sea, the embodied full dress uniform, fathoms down, unraveling as it walks, mining the port alone. I will be the apology. So the second poem I'll read is not from that book. It's a little more recent, and it experiments with a pre-existing text in a different way. This poem borrows the structure and the motivating subject. It's called The Bomb. It borrows its structure and that subject from a book by the historian John Dower. His book is Embracing Defeat, Japan in the Wake of World War II. This has been really interesting to do kind of syntax replacement experiments. I don't know if any of you all have done kind of manipulative work with texts in your own poetry practices or in teaching. It's really handy for teaching. But what it's done for me in this series of poems is help me kind of think about what the agent of a sentence is and what sentences have to say to us about agency. So how a sentence rearranges its parts and how that can help a subject of the sentence sort of acknowledge or admit or refuse culpability in a way. So this poem, if you follow the second link, this poem was published at Ducey, which is a Canadian journal, a few years ago. So you can read along there. It looks like this, like prose block. So it's called The Bomb. The bomb itself, rather than we who made it, largely invented the characteristics of being softened by abrasion, being wounded, flayed, our eyes melted. And from this, what came to be beloved was the gloss and fear of children in general. Fear itself, rather than the flayed concrete which banked it, comprised all our houses. And from this surprise, what came to be a shelter was cruelty toward our enemy. The moon itself, its greens, the waters casting back and forth for its owner, these largely absorbed our fears of being cruel and inhuman. And from this sanction, we came to wave our children forward through the glossy, bomb-soft grasses. The war itself, rather than the children who loved it, largely weathered the white flags, and we ourselves weathered the war. And from this window into our power, we came at last to see our flags as white with triumph in a green-lit, glossy, childless night. And the final poem I'll read is a really new one. I haven't been writing poems much because I've been writing a dissertation, which is over, although I haven't defended it yet. I'm really excited for when that happens. So this is a new poem. I'm excited to be writing poems again. And I think a common experience for many people over the last year has just been the sense that we're living through these capital H historical events, which, you know, and for many of us, it's plural events, right? I mean, there's pandemic, there's Brexit, like in the US, there was an attempted coup in January. And of course, in Hong Kong, it's also really felt, like, I mean, change has happened literally overnight. So on July 1st of last year, China basically passed for Hong Kong the national security law, which severely curtails the kinds of political expression and criminalizes a lot of political speech. And that's exactly the opposite of what Hong Kong was known for. It was a bastion of free speech. And that changed literally overnight. And people are still figuring out what that means because the law is quite vague. But I think for everybody, the power of language, of what you say, who hears you, what you write, who reads it, has suddenly just become extremely charged. This was very true. I was teaching poetry last term. I taught a class called Writing Hong Kong, which was just, I had to change my syllabus because I couldn't teach some of the things anymore that I had taught. And that was awful, being part of the self-censorship just because I didn't actually know if it would be a problem or not. So I think this poem is basically about, there was so much optimism in 2014 during the umbrella movement, which I think most people have heard about, a little familiar with. And then that optimism kind of faded, as the years went on afterwards, and not much changed. And then in the summer of 2019, it was amazing. 2 million people were in the street marching, and it suddenly felt, you could feel it everywhere outside. It felt like there was real hope for Hong Kong's political future. And now we have the security law, and that's impossible in some ways now. So this poem's about how it feels to, keeping going through that and all the other things. So the only two things you actually need to know, if you're not familiar with Hong Kong already, protesters were known to wear black everywhere. And then also, a lot of Hong Kongers, including myself, live in new towns in the new territories, not in Kowloon or in Hong Kong Island, which is kind of where the really skyscrapery, bustly part is. My town is called Tai Po, and there are 350,000 people who live here, but it's pretty far from the center. So that shows up also in the poem. This is called There's a Season Waiting behind this one. This morning began, and I should say this is all my language, I didn't borrow anything. This morning began with soldiering, a battle, some heroism I dreamed myself into. Out of these vague days become pure routine. I led a drill no one wanted to follow, convinced no one, even with real fire behind us smoking up the horizon, beyond which our sincerest hopes, beloved, backed down again. The radio switched on and off without our touching it. What came over the air was someone else's war. Or it was ours we began to make out in the purple blossoms blooming, the red blooms waning over the public pool backed by the factory block. The river's its own gauge, it's full as can be. It smells like a new town the night a single law arrives to carry all of us, our children, our animals, forward. A war of language, like a sea war, like a drone war, like a war in the stars making noise we can't hear. Though the drones are made where we live, their noise so close, their superhighway, entirely lit, blinking into dust, the yellow jackets swirling in a fog around the flowers. Not one of us could turn the corner as easily as that. Not one of us owns our own home or hopes to. The police ask a man wearing black for his wallet. The police walk around in fatigues. No bloom looks the same to me under this sky, if I can see the sky, if it's the kind of sky that's visible above my government. What light it sheds, I try to follow into night and out again, surrounded by fellow citizens. I wave to them. The nearest ones wave back, then look straight up, setting down their well-worn umbrellas now that umbrellas are no longer of use. Looking straight up, you have to open your eyes to see the clouds moving another direction than what you'd expected. You have to keep your eyes open, even as rain fills up their wells. Thank you.
And thank you so much for inviting me and giving us this really interesting theme. It's made me look at my poetry in a really different way. And I'm going to be reading poems that I don't usually read. So it's been a really interesting process. I lived for 10 years in King's Lynn, which is in West Norfolk, and I moved about 3 years ago. And while I was in King's Lynn, I became a town guide. I've always been obsessed with history, and this was an opportunity to look at a really specific history of an area. The first poem I'm going to read is about Fanny Burney. Fanny Burney is probably most famous for being one of the first female novelists. She published Evelina in 1778. Her father, Charles Burney, was a musicologist, and he was the local organist in King's Lynn. But the thing I find most fascinating about her is that in 1811, she actually had a mastectomy without anaesthetic in France because she was married to a high-ranking French soldier, and she couldn't get back to England because England was at war with Napoleon, and her husband was fighting for Napoleon. So she had top-ranking French surgeons conducting this operation, and there are some amazing entries in her diary about this, which I used to write this poem. Fanny Burney loses her right breast. 7 men in black try to hold her down. The thick wine cordial slows her blood. I feel the knife, she cries. The surgeon, face streaked with gore and fright, slices and stitches, calls for candles at as dusk shrouds her flinching body. He has filled a tureen with the fleshy lumps of her womanhood. But she lives 29 years longer. Hippolyta, a man's courage inside her, they whisper as she glides by. She loves her flatness, a new landscape to explore with her soldier husband. Under her pillow is the fraying leather strap, scored with the teeth marks of that long screaming. And the second poem comes from the same period of living in King's Lynn. I get obsessed with fascinating facts. I love kind of trivia. And King's Lynn is on the River Ouse, and there's a tributary running off it called the River Nar, which goes past a bone mill. And most of the bones were animal bones, a lot of whale bones from the whaling industry that happened in King's Lynn. But I discovered they were also grinding human bones from overflowing Prussian cemeteries. So we were importing human bones as fertilizer, to be ground up as fertilizer. And I found this quote which inspired this poem. 1 ton of German bone dust saves the importation of 10 tons of German corn. Bone meal. The ships sail in, heavy with resurrected bones. Prussian ballast from the graveyards rising like the tide with war, famine, pestilence. The bone mill waits, stone wheels ready to grind. Eternal souls have no need of femurs, climbing to heaven on faith-spun ladders. The miller grades the bones, washes them. They shift in the alien waters. Each bone contains a promise to nourish their host, accepting a Protestant death in this thin English soil. So that poem appears in my book, In the Kingdom of Shadows. And the second poem that I'm going to read also comes from that. And this is probably the most important poem I've written to date. It's about a friend of mine, Bryce, who died in 1987 during the AIDS pandemic. In the early 80s, I worked at the Royal Academy of Dancing. I was in my early 20s, and I saw the male dance world in particular decimated by the pandemic. I mention a quilt in the first part of this poem, and this is the Names Project in San Francisco, where they put the names of each victim of the AIDS pandemic on a square of quilt, which is now sadly enormous. So the poem's called Bryce, and Bryce was a choreologist. He did Laban notation, so he notated dances for posterity. Bryce. I learn this quilt will contain 100,000 unknown names. All 42 of my facial muscles try not to cry as I stitch the memory of the day you showed me your arms, bejeweled with sarcoma. How I felt the stutter of your dancing heartbeat. I reimagine you flying home to die in the Australian sun, while we mourned among the cold grey bricks of Rotherhithe. Then the others too were claimed, one by one, long and slow and cruel as purgatory. I honour your name in thread, the colour of sunlight, whispering all the news of all the years you never knew me. And it took me about 30 years to be able to write that poem. But my next collection, which is coming out with Live Canon in April, is called Confetti Dances. And the central section of this collection focuses on my witnessing the effect of the pandemic on the dance world. So this is one from Confetti Dances, and it's called Taboo. I was thinking about what Collier was saying about archives, and this is pre-internet days. It's very difficult for me to, once I decided to write about Bryce, actually find any material on him. But I found an obituary in the magazine of the Laban Association, which employed him to be a choreologist. And of course, it doesn't mention AIDS. It said he died after a long and serious illness. And Bryce died when I was living in Paris. And the acronym for AIDS in France and Spain is SIDA, S-I-D-A. Taboo. He died after a long and serious illness, not because of a four-letter word, a word as meaningless as half a sticking plaster, or the plural of help that never came, an acronym turned inside out in France and Spain, where its sound is a majestic tree of incorruptibility, eternal life, secret host to honey fungus, aphid attack. 4 letters, 1 syllable, lips rictus stretched, a final hissing sibilant, the unwilling tongue cradled by teeth, the smallest container for such enormity, like cupped hands with the world pouring through. And for my last poem, I'm going to share my screen. Jenny, can you just give me a thumbs up if that's appeared? Great, it's appeared. Good, so I can see what you can see. That's brilliant. This is also going to be in Confetti Dances, and Confetti Dances is about personal loss and generational loss. And I was very lucky to be chosen as one of 10 poets by the Poetry School who were working in collaboration with the Imperial War Museum to commemorate and memorialize the Battle of the Somme using the 1916 documentary film Battle of the Somme, which was astonishingly shot on location, though some of it mock-ups. And we performed, each of the 10 poets was given a section of the film to respond to, and I got the first section. And then each of us read this poem in performance at the Cinema Museum before a screening of this documentary film. Read their lips. This story has been told before, how the trees stood in dark rows like widows, how birdsong left the land, save for the calls of urgent owls, bright in the mute darkness. how the moon climbed to uncharted heights to flee the reek of brimstone, how poppies slumbered for 100 years, waiting for the world to change, how the villagers returned one by one, carrying their hurt in their pockets, how they laid their cheeks against the fissured land, salted it, and how in the nearness of now, the sons and daughters of the sons and daughters of the sons and daughters come, wearing flowers like pilgrim badges, how they pluck at the past, how it runs through their fingers like hourglass sand, how they raise their faces to the darkening sky, mouth their tales, individual, endless as the passing flakes of snow. Cut. See this man, so familiar he could be my father's grandfather. See how he strolls in this flickering parade, freak show of the long dead, these men chalky as fairground prizes, with their virgin bandages angling their smiles stage right, teeth worn to shadows, resisting the flinch and itch of lice squirming in the seams of sweat-caked uniforms. Dogs at their heels, a silent barking, coal in their pockets for luck. Trail of horses on the horizon stretches like a biblical caravanserai. Read their lips. Send my love to Ma and Doris and all my little ones. Have a pint in the Crown on me, Arthur, you lucky bugger. In her narrow Manchester bed, a woman dreams of her lover, runs towards his muddy back, the distance between them undiminished until, in a moment of stop-motion illogic, she is touch close, rising on tiptoe to kiss him where his mouth used to be. The camera tracks, left, right, left, right, left, right, 16 miles of grey fields, fissures like snow, smoke like cumulus, turning the July sun into January clad murk. Don't look back. Off frame, there's a technicolor world, a behind-the-scenes kaleidoscope of bleed and heave, a blink away. Over the mute horizon, a crater of sound, sentenced to another decade of silence. Bosch jigsaw of body parts, cut in a stinking crucible, cordite forged, cut. I watch you watching the film for the first time, eyeballs palpitating to the turns of a hand-cranked camera. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Cut. Intertitle. Industrious peasants continue their activities just outside the firing line. 2 women, a frame's worth glimpse, poke-bonneted, sturdy as blinkered war horses, clothed as if Van Gogh hadn't died nearly 30 years before, gleaning, or perhaps they are planting dragon's teeth, hoping to harvest the next crop of young men, fully grown, fully armed by the 1st of July. This is all they have, this precarious field, this tilted horizon. Cut. The camera pans back to these endless lines of marching men, arm in arm for all time, for Auld Lang Syne, singing A Long Way to Tipperary, as if it's not a cliche, sure of who they are, sound of limb, dog tags still with their rightful owners. Soon they will rise to become the missing of the song, faith broken on the hard-rimmed wheel of war, ghosting the sky like a new constellation, whispering inconnu, inconnu, inconnu. Thank you. I thought I could get away with a Cockney accent because my mum's a Cockney, so hope that was okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Jenny. And thank thank you everyone for your poems. Can you all hear me okay? Is that all right, Jenny?
Yes, yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, so my first poem, since it was recently Lunar New Year, and one of the things my family does for that is leave offerings on our shrines, I'd like to start with a poem about that. So I'm actually sitting next to my grandfather's shrine right now, so it's a bit like he's watching. Offerings for Ongwai. Believe that a hand of bananas will snag only the purest omens on their tips. Believe in a powdery bean moon wrapped in a cake, that when I unwind its banana leaf, I part the earth and return the moon to you. Believe that our burning papers will reach you as the finest silk. Believe that these mandarins are the blaring shade of wealth, that when peeled they will glow like the cupped flames we floated down the perfume river. Believe that this pineapple was once a girl who wished for 1,000 eyes, that it will detect anything that is lost. Believe that we have learned to split mangkuk with a meat cleaver, that their white hearts keep us tender. Believe that Bangwai has not touched meat since the last time she saw you, that she still mutters in Hokkien, although there is no one left who understands. Believe that we will find you at the end of this path of salt. So, although I never learned to speak Vietnamese, which is my mother's first language, I've always been really interested in how the diacritical marks can completely change the meaning of a word. So I decided to explore that using my own name, and this is the poem that came out of that. Middle name with diacritics. Lin Hong, Seoul. 1. A voice tapping from inside the skin. 2. Guan Am, the goddess of compassion, at the end of her 9th life, having shed the last stinging layer of flesh. 3. A temple full of starving yellow birds. 4. Ancestors who stitch your prayers into houses with the floors missing. 5. The name of 4 teenage girls in my mother's refugee camp. 6. The part of me often left out or misspelled, that moves quietly through the world. Lin, soldier. 1. 2 sisters who delivered a village from the throat of a tiger, the Red River's champions, anointed as queens. 2. A woman, their descendant 200 years later, who carried girls from the betrayal of moonlight, searched a field for the skinless face of someone she loved. 3. Frenchman who guarded Bangwai school gates when she was a girl. She cycled right up in white ao yai, offered paper flowers. She had never heard a foreign accent before. 4. The ringing in the ears after a grenade shreds open the morning. 5. The rising tone of flesh, heavy with napalm. 6. A man who searches a crater he made earlier, who returns to Wei many years later, touches reconstructions of all he destroyed. Ban Lin, bravery. 1. A monk whose heart will not burn no matter the heat, whose words tugged his spirit from his body to watch over the spectacle of suffering, the way a flower opens to drought. 2. A woman hiding bribes in the walls, stops the shake of her hands when she lies. 3. A girl in her parents' deserted house in Baklio, selling hats, waiting for word from her mother, hiding from an older man who has been watching her grow. 4. A mother bargaining for broken rice, cubes of pork, cigarettes, ginger to help stomach her 12th child, still inside her. 5. A man who lies on a table on a boat, no anesthetic, black powder medicine, the smell of burning. 6. A girl again in a camp, her fingers on her sister's wrist through the night. Ra Lin, to command. 1. A girl who stops eating, asks her body to follow her into silence. 2. Bullets at a teenage boy's heels as he runs from his uncle's seized field. 3. Scripture by unholy men, ordering Ongwai to tame a jungle into a home. 4. Heirloom surrendered for silence, birth dates, sea, exile. 5. Names given up because home did not rest easily on unyielding tongues. 6. My mother's medicated bloodstream that tells her her pain does not exist, that her bones have not yet lived through all they can endure. Okay, this next poem I've never actually read in public before, but I thought I would today. And all you need to know is that in Vietnamese mythology, Auco is a mountain fairy and the mother to the first Vietnamese people. Praying to Auco after my first cervical screening. Auco, today I pushed my fists under my hips and said your name. My mother says you were a mother before anyone else, and so all our women can find you at the salted edges of their flesh. Long ago, before I ever called on you, a warm pain unraveled, and I stopped singing mid-hymn, convinced someone would know. Another time I left a stain in a friend's bed, along with something solid, like a boiled leaf. Auca, even now, I only know you by the wringing of your hands. Sometimes you are the woman in my dreams, who bails out an ocean using her daughter's hair, births mountains when she feels the stars shift. More often you are the faint bird my mother draws in the margins of letters. Auca, I should tell you, we still have our own ways of holding on to our bodies. Like the tea my mother swears will nourish the womb and lead to a healthy pregnancy. When asked, does this hurt? We still lie, brace our knees, stare into brittle white light. So since it was also recently Valentine's Day, I thought I'd read a love poem, and it's called Tattik. And Tattik is a festival celebrating love, which takes place on the 7th day of the 7th lunar month. Tattik, 7th month, Saigon, 1975. They share a dish of beans like small blood clots, believing that they will one day wake to a tea ceremony, Mam Kwa, a blessing written on a wall. She rides home on the front of his bicycle as their city reddens. She threads 7 needles in poor light, stitches his ring into the left cuff of her blouse. She swears that every mungao is a new ghost wringing out its hair. She barters for extra cigarettes, holds a match to her lips. In the sky, they see the husk of a silver river, the wing-shaped breath of 2 exiled gods. Neither know that each will cross the sea 5 years apart, that when she sleeps, they will meet on a bridge, woven from the spines of birds. So this next poem is quite recent and it can be read 2 ways, but I'll just read it one way today. And it's called The Tale of Dingvay / Departing the Shore. And Dingvay is a mythical woman who is transformed into a bird after drowning, and so works to fill up the sea to stop anyone else dying in the same way. And this poem mixes that myth with a migration story that was told to me by my mum. The Tale of Dingvay / Departing the Shore. I remember the brittling of boats leaving shores at night, the metal roar of my bones, government sea mines, how I writhed as the sky shifted between woman and bird. Eyeless faces began to wash up. I became a prayer for surviving boats, helmed by gold-bribed captains, fishermen and seafarers, as they gathered at the hems of closed countries, made pacts with storms. I watched and waited. Children tugged at the skirts of clouds, mothers' stiff fingers. 2 men crawled on deck. I spoke to them in the language of fish bones and smoked tea leaves, but could not thaw their chests to answer their cravings. All travellers learned why, after months of stale water, I wished to drain the sea. Many hoped to leave thirst behind. Some grew hungry after weeks of hard biscuits, tried to shoot me from the sky as young girls spat their back teeth. My calls stirred their blood. They heard tell of things I cannot forget, smaller boats capsizing, the last screams of women rushing to the heavens, thieves who swam to retrieve jackets lined with rings, and clung to their talismans even as the waves rose. As the wind stole their names, the survivors dreamt of unknown ghosts. To some, a body does not exist despite the will to breathe until claimed by land. It is easier to reach for ghosts. Those on long voyages crammed aboard gave up on rescue. No one knew where their bodies ended. The colours of the sky between dehydration and grief became home. Men slept with fists ready, but still I left my shadow curing beneath their pillows. On sand, old tales of spring love were sung to guide the way. To stifle fear, I whispered my true name, and every daughter listened. Let it reach those with no nation. Each night the same mantra, I vow not to weep. If I can hear a voice, I vow not to swell this water, I live. So again, because it was recently Lunar New Year, I'd like to close with a New Year poem. And this is called Luk Bat Patat. And Luk Bat is a traditional Vietnamese form. And my poem is an English language adaptation of that. And Tat is Vietnamese for New Year. Luk Bat Patat. Like this, we trap a god. Mix dragon pearls with hot water. Gather every daughter who kneels through the torture of her hunger. Avoid the curse of mirrored doorways, nurse your sick before the ghosts come. Slick red balm on swollen wrists, hide sores that flash sharp as a chorus of suns. Close the door on bad wind, let the child with fat earlobes enter first. Scatter Lucy on the young, and demons will not come. No meat today, no fire in throat. Pray for bloated souls and pay your debts to the living. Wear red but conceal your blood. Let all omens of wounds lie still. Know that Hoa Mai trees still grow in your uncle's garden, that your fortune will hold. Pile your shrines with Bang Chung Chai, Mangkuk. Witness the dead stir with myths of spring. Thank you so much for listening.
Into the real world soon. So I'll read a few poems from After the Formalities. I mean, a lot of the ideas and the kind of preoccupations of this book are centered around the landscape of memory of the family, both as a physical entity, but also as symbol, and how that ties into the idea of empire and colonialism, and how kind of post-colonial residue shapes, I guess, a lot of the ways in which people that came out of the empire think about themselves. I'm really interested in that kind of intersection of colonial residue. And my family come from Cyprus. It was a British colony up until 1960. It's been a colony of a lot of different places for around 2,000 years. Hasn't really had it's still not independent. The country split in two, the south and the north. There's 2 British military bases in Cyprus to this day, which kind of says that it's never really been autonomous in the 2,500-year history. So a lot of these poems look at that culture of hybridity that is very kind of exclusive to Cyprus in how long it's actually been a colony of different empires and different groups. So yeah, this poem is, the first one is called Cause. And to the burning I say, my worry is a whole country. I've been myself longer than my undoing. Heavy trunk of silverware, museum glass polish, portraiture of bent flags. I'm here as my grandparents were, only with a moving mouth. During empire, my people were subjects first, citizens later. Once the vigilantes managed to zip up their coats, flames lambent. My grandmother died with umbrellas outstretched in her gut. My grandmother died. To be British is to be everywhere. Some roots have been in the earth for so long, they know only to call themselves earth. A worm's pink nipple bleeds into snow. My birth, my mother's brown skin. I'd already filled half myself with Britannia's air. It took them a month to find my name. one of the other questions that I think gets asked a lot is this idea of where we come from. And I know that in certain kind of academic and I guess like left-leaning political discourses, it's almost like a taboo to get asked where you're from, because of the fact that it's such a loaded question, and the fact that a lot of people have weaponized someone's origin. And so it's murky ground to try and ask someone where they're from. And so a few years ago, I did a gig for the British Council, and a lady afterwards came up and she said to me, like, she was like an older lady, and we were having some kind of drinks and stuff behind stage, and she just came up and she put her elbow on my arm and she said to me, young man, can I ask you where you're from? And I got really uncomfortable. Like I didn't know how to answer it. And I couldn't work out if she was being like just curious or if it was something different. So I just basically said, I'm from London. And then she went, no, I mean, like, where are you really from? And I said, oh, okay, I'm from North London. And at that point, she got a little bit pissed off with me. And I think I got pissed off with her, but it was that kind of thing where it was like, I wasn't too sure how you navigate this question. And so I kind of started thinking about it, and it turned into this poem that looks at that kind of duality between being culturally curious about where someone's from to try and find some kind of like, there's a common ground. Oh, I went there, or I can speak that language, or yeah, my son is married to a blah, blah. So, or the other side is I just want to put you in a box and I want to keep you there. And that's the part that I can't quite work out with a lot of these kind of questions. And it's obviously a projection on my behalf, because sometimes you are just a little bit too sensitive to these questions. And so everything gets filtered through this very particular, like, ominous lens. This is called a line of simple inquiry. Follows in the traditional vein of questioning when one encounters a person or persons they perceive to be other. The famous public autopsy at a dinner party, art gallery, gymnasium, or local bakery. 3 words light as a baby's finger, but where really? The taxonomy of difference, along with the need or entitlement to ask so politely, with one hand resting on the elbow, displaying caution, not wanting to infer, with emphasis on assume, as in to avoid causing offense, becoming more scrutinized, every feature up against the light, your body under their knife. The question again, so as to deduce, so as to allow the remarkable recalling of definitive histories, Ibn Khaldun, Mansa Musa, Phyllis Wheatley and Al-Afghani, your people, as in extraordinary, as in don't take this the wrong way, as in don't take this to heart, but it's also fascinating, an appreciation, if you will, to announce so subtly, without hubris, the panoply of books read on the way we eat and live and love and bury our dead. And really, it's all just so interesting. As if interest were a desperate thing scurrying across a mass grave, an artifact snatched from an old warrior's hand, neat wall text in a city museum, to cast iron eyes over incredulity. You don't look like the aquiline nose was the giveaway, skin thicker than animal sex that never cracks under God, and all those nuances, bloating the unfished ghosts of the sea, and all that hair. Is it natural? Is it yours? Is it real? To touch what I own, take what I see. There's a reason why my daddy told me to keep a stone between my fists when I fight. And really, it's all just too complicated. And everything's already been said much better by people who had it much worse. But look, is this your attempt to bid me farewell in my tongue? Are you here to help carry the burden of my name? Are your hands strong enough to lug it? We all know the stuck fish bone never meant any harm. Is that your hand still on my elbow? Cool. All right. I'll do maybe one more. How are we doing for time, Jenny? I don't know what I'm doing here. How are we doing for time?
Yeah, we're all right. Yeah, just keep going.
All right. I'll do one more and see where we get with this one. This is a fun one. I often, like fun in the sense like I enjoy saying it. not fun as in subject matter, but I just like the kind of, I like how I have great difficulty in keeping still, both in my mind and in my body. And so like I try and find poems that are kind of ADHD in the way in which the synapses just bounce around the rooms quite a lot. And this is one of those poems that I sometimes just have to write for the sake of my own sanity. It looks at kind of social pressures. Once I had an acceptance speech. Driving too close to the curb, admit to being poor, stash pumpkin seeds for my kid, I hustle the Christian way, starch my shirt collars, value a strong smudge, give pigeons saintly names, cream both my feet, recycle, sign off emails with warm regards, double tap hashtag vegan, heart statuses which start with I am delighted to announce mornings. I struggle to decide what mood to wear. Evenings, I lay beside my aftershaves, imagining the sea. I should really have it by now, a Dyson, Panasonic bread maker, a photo by the piano of a slum tour. I need the spirit of a full moon party rather than the charisma of a shed. They honk when I slow. I swear with my eyes, think of real blood. Sunday comes and Dad asks, what's the plan? I knit him the only winning scratch card. I leave a candle on for destiny once. I had an acceptance speech written. Soon a staircase will rise to defeat us all. The roads have moved. When I get in, I'll sit in the shower and say it's a bath. Double tap an ultrasound pic, sip railroad water. Notification, Zank 1 started following you. Check my speed, slap on another Barry Manilow playlist, keep my grays in the dashboard. Wonder what the guy who put a gun to my little brother's head is doing for New Year's. Wonder if my neighbor made it through. Up ahead, a badger's hit beside a boulder, its glare, a wooden egg, and I slow for. Yes, that was fun. As fun as it gets behind the screen on a Monday. Let's do this last one. Let's do last one. Discursive meditation on the photograph does exactly what it says on the tin. I don't really like writing giving poems titles that do exactly what the poem does. I kind of think it's a bit boring, but this one I think I got a bit lazy and just decided to call the poem exactly what I was trying to do when I wrote it. So it's called a discursive meditation on the photograph. Of image and frame holding subject matter by its considered light. Can you see? Sentences of angularity, the grammar of buildings, uniformed neon, the emblem of something flying, something falling, middle distance stare. The popinjay moves to occupy more corners, dinky libertine, the sky grows from out your shoulders, garlanded by the matted hair of poverty, set the coffee on the table, roadkill aesthete. Rushing to buy a footprint in sand. What is more necessary? The ocean's blue or hope? Panoramic view blinded by light's lack. A matchstick model of a church is balanced on a child's wrist. Pray or play, move around, hold still for me now. Dead corpse, so stunning and dead. Bomb blast silent, exploded flash, broken footage, all barren and ruddy. Carnage of apathy, gruesome and exposed and somehow newsworthy, dreaming of porn, dead porn, death porn, murder fatigue. War is a woman trembling and nude, a man boneless. War is a boat with a continent in tow, a grin of bastards, move away from me. Chamomile tea calm, flower market Sundays, dreamy and bucolic, place it properly, change the lens, make it personal, move around, take another antiseptic song, blue infirmary, where days are drained by cancer and there's tumors in the water. The nurse's steady lift onto the bed is in memory of closed mortuaries and those further afield. Hold my hand before I die and I love you. Hold my hand as I am born and I love you. A life spent asking for help, asking for love. Do you love me? Do I look good in this body, in this red or this green? Every color is alone. Try taking it from over there. Airbrush the moon's stretch marks. Ask the river to pout. Ask the sea to smile. How many sunsets do we bury in ourselves before we die? And still, my sadness can be nothing but human, flummoxed and looking to forget. Can you see? Can you feel the breath of each brick in this city? We are born to a siren and the wail of each other. I'll drink to that and I'll pray with dog shit on my shoe and a bladder full of piss. Can you see? Everyone gather round my worst side, asymmetric as rock. This is a honeymoon calling for a rescue boat, a penny balancing on a baby's heart. This is me wanting to look like I've been painted by someone other than myself. Give me direction, show me God, keep me still, push me down, wash my thoughts before you shoot. Everything is looking for release. Say you look tired. Talk to me about love, the people you remember. Say something different, say something strange. Talk to me about funerals, the men who stand apart from their wives. Ask me to look up. Say, there you are. Can you see? Okay.
I was thinking about research. It's so hard when you've done a lot of research. It's really hard to get your poem to wear it lightly. And I was thinking about, how do we do that? How much do we put in? How much do we leave out? How much do we leave to the kind of transformation process, the alchemy? What do we want the reader to take from our poem in terms of how researched it is? And do we use footnotes? I've been looking at, don't know if you're familiar with Joel Taylor's Songs My Enemy Taught Me. And I get quite annoyed with The Wasteland, T.S. Eliot, because of all the footnotes. But I absolutely loved this book, which has loads of footnotes, because the poems feel like they stand alone, but I learnt so much as well. So I don't know what how the others feel about that. How do we get our poems to wear that research lightly, but it's also present? Sorry, it's a really long question.
Natalie?
Yeah, sure. So I tend to do a lot of research, but then it just ends up scattered throughout different poems so that any one poem doesn't end up feeling bloated. And also the effect of that is that when my poems are kind of put all together, I feel like they speak to each other and form a fragmented arc. But yeah, that's how I balance it. I save everything I have and then just like scatter it here and there.
I can speak to that. Yeah, Natalie, what you say makes a lot of sense to me. There's a feeling of, and I guess this is what you say, what you mean, maybe when Sue, when you talk about the transformation, the alchemy, right? So there becomes like a, it has to be multiple pieces, right? I think I have stopped thinking in terms of a poem being one poem, and it doesn't feel quite right to me if it doesn't have something plural happening. But this is also the question about the place of research is also why I work with actual documents and then I make them accessible, like the link to all the documents that I used and where I found them. So they're in their like bizarre context. Like one thing was translated by the USS Strategic Bombing Survey while they were trying to figure out how to bomb and how to like where to hit Japan so it would hurt most. And that document is only available in English at the National Diet Library of Japan. So that's where I found it. So, but if you follow the link, you know, you can do a deep dive. And for me, making it possible for a reader to go there, even though I doubt many readers, you know, maybe do, but I want to facilitate that so that you can kind of go back into layers and layers and see how all that fits together.
Very much. Okay. Anthony, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's something that I think about a lot. That kind of fusion between theory and poetry. You know, like where how do the two meet and how do they talk to each other? I think I use a lot of history in my work because I read a lot of history and I'm interested in this kind of idea that subjects and events will overlap. And I'm interested in that kind of grey area. But I think for me, where I draw the line with it is that if I do offer footnotes, and I think of books that do offer a lot of footnotes, I think of Lady Long Soldier, I think of Don Mi Choi, I think of Claudia Rankin, and like all these books, they give a lot of detail, but I think they're quite select in that what they do is they reinforce the poem's argument. And I think that's what's really important, is if you're having footnotes to demystify the poem, I feel it goes the other way, and it becomes more, it lends itself more to academia and to a dissertation and to kind of, but I think if you're using footnotes in the opposite way, I want people to go off on their own search, and I'm still going to keep a bit of ambiguity behind this. I think Lady Long Soldier does it really well in Whereas, in how she uses Barack Obama's apology and how she subverts that. I mean, I worked with Joelle on Songs My Enemy Taught Me, and it was really important that we gave the readers enough of a kind of scaffold to think about the poems with, but I was really adamant that we don't overdo it, because she had a lot more footnotes. So I was really adamant that we kind of push back a little bit and let the readers do a bit of work as well. Like, that's the idea, like you don't want to do everything for them. So yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
I think that I gravitate a lot towards really fragmented forms. So like things that are in lists or sections or have the slashes in them. And for me, that captures the way that I have absorbed the stories that my mum's told me and the stories that I read myself. It was told to me in a very fragmented way, and so I relate it in a very fragmented way. And also, like the poet Nina Minya Pals, she talked about using the slash as a way trying to exist in two places at once, and that really speaks to me as well. So when I read that, I just thought, oh yeah, this is exactly what I'm trying to do with this slash. Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. I find that the form kind of just comes when I'm writing, and that somehow the poem seems to find the form it needs. And in the new collection, I've got a lot of found poems. I've been thinking, I was really interested in Collier using erasure, because that's something I've actually never done. I use a lot of found poetry, so I suppose I'm kind of using erasure in that I'm selecting certain pieces from the base texts. But I really love to use slashes, to use stream of consciousness, couplets, something very fragmented on the page. I think the poem just kind of tells you what it needs in the end. And I think the reader, as a reader of poetry, I quite like multiple forms. I like to be taken through a world of different forms when I read, and have plenty of white space where I can interact with the text myself. So I guess I'm trying to reproduce that in a way.
Yeah, your point about interaction with the reader makes a lot of sense to me. I think, again, to return to the fact that I don't feel like this book is like entirely itself in the paper version, but like if you want to get a job, you have to have a book, blah, 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 right? That's kind of changing, but I'm exploring now with a project called Shopette, which is the name of the 24-hour convenience stores that are on all U.S. military bases overseas and domestically. And I'm trying to figure out a way of making the digital version of this project be a way that you can buy something. Like, I really want to come up with a way where it's, it's kind of seductive in the way it engages you as a reader to do something maybe you're not supposed to be doing, but because you spend time online buying things all the time or shopping for things all the time, that like you kind of want, and I kind of want to be playing with that, with the sense of how well, as Anthony mentioned, like it's hard to be behind a screen and interacting with people when there's emails coming in or there's somebody at the door or whatever it is. I just feel like it's interesting to me to try and find a form that can make use of that that kind of fragmentation with poetry and kind of take advantage of it some way. So I'm excited about where that's going. I have not figured it out yet, but getting the reader to be available and interested in playing with me among topics that are not really for play is something that I'm trying to do, I think.
Yeah, that's a really, again, it's one of these ones that I think we spend a lot of time agonizing over, formalism. And I think that stretches all the way through to like a sestina, a couplet, you know, all the way through to like a free write and automatic writing. But I think my kind of main philosophy and what I try to honor when I think about form is that the thought has to reflect the form, not the other way around. So if I want to write a sestina, I think that's when I'll fail. Like I have to have a thought that fits the sestina. And that's how, for me, I work. And if I have an idea for something and I can see the kind of essence of this thought wants or suits the form of, then I'll write it that way. So that for me is really how I work. I also, and we mentioned the reader, I've given up on the reader and it's absolutely amazing. Like it's the best thing. It frees you. And I know like Mary Ruefle and poets like this speak a lot about the idea of forget the reader, because you're essentially creating a poem for someone who you don't know, for someone who's invisible, and it's a projection. It's really you distilling an idea of what you think a reader is. So all your predilections and biases will literally be in that filter, and you create your ideal reader. And it's so weird because that's what happens. But I think if you rid yourself of the idea of a reader, like they don't exist. I don't know if it's the guy who drives the 52 bus or a professor with 43 PhDs. I don't know who's going to be reading these poems. And that is incredibly liberating for me because I can go anywhere in the poem now. Like I'm not restricted by all these kind of class, race, gender, sexuality, faith, like all these limitations that we put in place when we're pointing our poems into a particular space. So I kind of feel that having the form open and having the readers open, as in reader plural, is much more, for me, I find much more beneficial and conducive than trying to limit the kind of the remit or the ambit of a poem.
I guess it's kind of complicated. So for me, it's like neither side of me growing up has been particularly hidden from me. My mum was always very open about her stories, and we always celebrated Lunar New Year as well as Christmas. So it's not so much that it was unspoken for me, it's that I didn't have the language to write about it for a long time until I came across poetry. And that's when the experiences started to, I guess, unfold in a way that I could explore better.
That's interesting, thank you.
Yeah, I think with me, I have this idea that I am both British and Cypriot, which I put in the bio. You know, like I had people emailing me sometimes saying, "Why do you feel the need to disclose that you're Cypriot?" And it's a political act. Like, it's incredibly political, particularly the idea of being British as well, because it's something that is denied to a lot of people. You know, like you can't be British because you're not. I was born here. My parents weren't. They were immigrants, but I'm still entitled to claim British. I don't claim Englishness, but I claim Britishness. And I think that dual consciousness, that double consciousness, which is what Webb Du Bois termed at the turn of the 20th century, is this idea that you're navigating two identities. Not only you're navigating the Cypriot experience, but I have to navigate that in contrast to the British experience, which is kind of knocking back against it. And so I kind of feel that you're dealing with these two worlds that essentially straddle each other, and they overlap and imbricate. And I kind of feel that it's in that space where the poetry comes out from, for me, because there's ambiguity in that, and poetry is amazing for ambiguity. for things that aren't clear, for questions that have no resolve or have no answers. I think that's what makes the best poems. Poems that resolve, or poems that know. I feel there's something less interesting about those than poems that are searching, if that makes sense. And that's what I'm doing, and I'll probably be doing it for the rest of my life, to be honest, but that's how I see the function.
Collier, do you have, I mean, I don't know if you want to mention anything about different cultures or you.
Well, I think I'll mention Dawn Mei Choi, who Anthony just mentioned. She's one of the poets that I wrote on for my dissertation, and I think reading her and thinking a lot about the way she writes and what's powerful about her writing for me kind of comes down to her talking about how English for her is not, it's not a second language. She learned Korean first. She was born in Korea, and then came through Hong Kong actually, and then moved to the US. She says it's her colonial language, the way her father's colonial language was Japanese, because he grew up in Korea during the time of the Japanese occupation. And to think about my native language as a colonial language and not just as the language that I speak. I mean, it feels like obviously like an important thing to realize and to do, right? But I think that many poets who speak English as a native language without other languages, you know, that their families speak, without being people who, like Anthony says, get asked, where are you from really? You know, that doesn't happen to me because I'm like white. But realizing that one's language is always the way that you wield it is totally informed by power dynamics that everybody around you is attending to, I think is critical. And she talks about the difference between English as a kind of a mastery, you know, you have mastery of English versus errorist English, which is purposefully rhyming with terrorist, right? Like the idea of the way you can use English to reveal and challenge its assumed superiority as a colonizing language. And so I think about that a lot living in Hong Kong. My American English is and is not the English that most Hong Kongers are mastering, are masters of, right? So it becomes especially important in reading and in teaching in Hong Kong.
It's called Some Are Always Hungry. It's by Ji Hyun Yoon, and she's Korean American, and it's really beautiful. It explores the war in Korea, but also mothers and daughters and womanhood, and yeah, for that reason that really speaks to me. And something else is this with Antiemetic for Homesickness, which came out last summer now. Again, I think that this is obviously, the language is really beautiful, but also it interacts with not only history, but also the present. It's a very, I think it's a book very much for the present time that shouldn't be like, what is it, dismissed, especially in the wake of like how much it's been proven that we really depend on migrant nurses and their labor. So yeah, it's just something that I think everyone should read, really. And one more is Ripe by Isabel Barfi. It's a pamphlet. And I just think the voice is really distinctive. I think the forms are, like the scatterings are just really cool. And yeah, I think what it says about the process of growing up and exploring relationships between families and things like that, I just think it's really powerful as well.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Collier, do you have anything to show?
Yeah, also can we type, yeah, can we type them in? I just realized like I'm like listening, looking at the book covers, and spaces are very small. Yeah, I have two that I just got that I'm excited about. This one I've read most of already. It's Travesty Generator by Lillian Yvonne Bertram. And she, to speak again to Anthony's point about the reader, right? Like whether you imagine the reader there or not. I mean, she explains in the back in the end notes that these poems are partially written with code, with Python, and with language generating and sort of randomizing code sequences. And she says she's really inspired by Harriet Mullins's essay, Imagining the Unimagined Reader, Writing to the Unborn and Including the Excluded. And in that, Harriet Mullen points out that she is, as a Black woman, she is not the imagined reader of many of the historical texts that she has read, right? Like those people writing never imagined that like she, a Black woman, would be reading this text and like making something of it. And so she thinks about that when writing that essay. And Lillian Yvonne Bertram is thinking about how she's also, as a Black woman, an unimagined coder, right? Like how coding is not imagined, like the audience for coding, like people who code are not understood to be imagined to be Black. And so that's part of what's going on with this book. And it's just really good. I mean, I also love found and manipulative text poems, obviously. This is what I'm really into. But it's great. It's great. And then this one I haven't started reading yet, except just flipping through. This is Susan Bianti, who, this book is called Defacing the Monument. And she runs a program at University of Arizona. She's part of their creative writing MFA, and she runs a program which sends MFA students to the border to do writing projects. And she's interested in using, newspaper things about citizenship, public documents about citizenship, what it means to be to be a citizen, really. And then she also, to bring up Layli Long Soldier, this is a reproduction of one of Layli Long Soldier's poems in here. So she's also incorporating other current poets' texts about these questions. So these are both really exciting.
Thank you.
And I can type them in.
Sue, Anthony?
Yeah, I think I've been using this past year to catch up a bit as well, and I've been reading a lot of prose, especially non-fiction. So I've got a kind of mixed bag of recommendations for you. The first one is definitely Louder Than Hearts, Zina Hashem-Beck, and it's thanks to Jenny that I came across Zina Hashem-Beck because she was one of the featured poets quite a while ago. And I love the way she navigates history and culture and language. She's got a lot of Middle Eastern forms like ghazals in here. She uses a lot of Arabic very beautifully in the text. It's just fascinating, and it's so emotionally connected as well. It's very moving. Thinking about history, I've been rereading Heidi Williamson's Return by Minor Road. I just really admire this book. I think Jenny reviewed it recently for Ambit, but it looks at the Dunblane shootings of 1996, and it looks at how Heidi was living in Dunblane at the time and how she's still affected by the community's losses today. And how beautiful the landscape and the environment was, and how it's only remembered for these shootings now. And I think this book didn't get the attention it deserved. It's a brilliant document, it really is. I got this for my birthday, so this is a bit of a tome, but I'm obsessed with Paris. I'm writing about Paris for my next new collection, and it's called No Modernism Without Lesbians, and it's by Diana Suami, and it's a study of 4 women who lived in Paris and were great patrons of the art, or changed the face of the literary world. So it's Gertrude Stein, Sylvia Beach of Shakespeare and Company, Natalie Barney, and I never know how to pronounce this, but Breyer, who was HD's lover. It's absolutely fascinating. I've also been reading Rebecca Solnit's Wanderlust, which has inspired quite a few poems as well. So that's her history of walking in prose. And the poet I've grown to most love over the last year because of a group I'm in, and 2 of the members of that group are on this very Zoom screen, is Ada Limon, Tamsin and SK Grout. And I can't choose. Don't make me choose. There's The Carrying, there's Bright Dead Things, and there's Sharks in the Rivers. And I can't choose one of those. They're all absolutely fabulous. So yeah, sorry, lots of books.
Thank you so much. Wow, amazing. Anthony, have you got?
Yeah, those are all really great recommendations. I've made some notes here. I'm definitely going to check some of them out. I think I always have like 3-4 books on my desk that I kind of look from. One of the books I've been really obsessed with recently is this new one from Joyelle Mcsweeney, which is Toxicon and Arachne, and I really love how weird and long and garrulous and bold and risky these poems are. She just like, it's one of these books. I said to my friend the other day that you read one poem and it makes you just want to write. That's what happens. It's so infecting, and it's new. It's just come out, or it was out in the States last year, but Corsair have brought it out over here, and I just love it. She's got Sistinas, like a crown of Sistinas, which is pretty nuts, Patricia Smith style, and sonnets as well. And one's kind of doing crowns of sonnets at the moment, but and I'm not massive on them because they feel a bit worn out, but her ones are really interesting. And Frank Bedart is another one that I read this a lot, mainly because it's got a lot of space, it's got a lot of room, it's high lyric, it's philosophical. So yeah, there's a lot of really interesting ideas in that. He's got this line where it says at 74, all that's left to mourn is my future. And it just like, it cuts everything, you know, like it's a great line. And the other one that isn't here is Natalie Shapiro's new one, Popular Longing. And Natalie Shapiro is another one that when I read her, I just like, well, part of me just wants to give up writing altogether. And then it just makes you want to be a better poet, I guess, like just do more stuff in your work. And yeah, I think that the three of them have got, for me, they take a lot of risk, and risk is so important to the work, because I think that I just get bored of poems that I feel that I've read, or that this person's just sticking to like a form that's been explored, done so many times. And so I kind of feel that when I feel like I'm in new ground, that's when it really comes to life for me. And that usually means just being really weird and strange. So like the avant-garde have always been like the point of call for me. And fusion, like I'm into hybrid forms, which I think we've spoken about quite a lot this afternoon. So yeah, that's where I sit with it.
Thank you very much. That's amazing. Well, lots of books to catch up on. And yes, I agree. Like sometimes reading great books makes you want to be a better poet, or, you know, you get very inspired to write the next thing. Thank you everyone to this event. And it's really wonderful to have you all here. And I think maybe we will be going, going to a better spring, and keep reading, keep writing, all of us. And do check out also our Facebook page, because there are some events coming up again as well, on the 6th of March and 23rd of March. 6th of March is a joint event with Asian Cha on Hong Kong poetry, and then 23rd